It was a cold gray morning when a struggling man stumbled upon something that would change his life forever. His shoes were worn, his jacket barely thick enough to keep out the chill, but he was used to the discomfort. As he walked along the bustling city streets, his eyes caught a glimmer on the sidewalk, a small object sparkling under the faint sunlight. Curious, he bent down and picked it up, his breath catching in disbelief. It was a diamond ring, its brilliance unmistakable even in the dull light of the day. For a moment, he froze, torn between temptation and integrity. He could barely afford his next meal, let alone the rent that was overdue. The ring could be his ticket out of the endless cycle of hardship. Yet deep down, he knew someone was missing this precious piece of their life. The question gnawed at him. Should he keep it or try to find its rightful owner? Determined to do the right thing, he set off on a journey to return the ring, not knowing that his choice would lead to something far beyond what he could have ever imagined. As he navigated the challenges of finding the owner, he had no idea that his simple act of honesty would unravel a story of kindness, gratitude, and an unexpected twist that would leave him and everyone involved forever changed. But what exactly awaited him at the end of this path? Stay tuned to find out. As he clutched the diamond ring in his hand, the man's mind raced with possibilities. Who had lost it? Was it a gift from a loved one, a family heirloom, or perhaps the promise of a future? He couldn't shake the feeling that this ring carried a story far greater than he could imagine. He decided to start his search at a nearby coffee shop, a popular spot where people from all walks of life crossed paths. The cafe was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the icy streets outside. He approached the counter and asked the barista if anyone had reported a missing ring. The young woman shook her head, but offered to keep an eye out. She even let him leave a small note by the register, found diamond ring. Described to claim. It was a long shot, but it was a start. As he stepped outside, the cold wind bit at his face, but he pressed on. He stopped at a pawn shop, showing the ring to the shopkeeper and asking if anyone had come in looking for it. The man behind the counter squinted at the ring and gave a low whistle. "That's a beauty," he said. "Could fetch a fortune if you wanted to sell it." The man shook his head. "I'm not looking to sell. I just want to find who it belongs to." The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Suit yourself. But be careful. Something that valuable might bring trouble." The warning lingered in his mind as he left the shop. Trouble was the last thing he needed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that returning the ring was the right thing to do. As the day wore on, he visited more places, libraries, grocery stores, and even the police station, leaving his contact information and describing the ring to anyone who would listen. That evening, as he sat in his tiny apartment, the weight of the day's efforts settled on him. He placed the ring on the small table in front of him and stared at it. It sparkled under the dim light, a stark contrast to the peeling wallpaper and the stack of overdue bills beside it. He wondered if he had made a mistake. Maybe he should have sold it, just enough to get by for a while. But deep down, he knew he couldn't live with himself if he did. The next morning, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. The text read, "I think the ring you found might be mine. Can we meet?" His heart raced. This could be it. But something about the message felt off, too vague, too convenient. He decided to reply cautiously, asking for a description of the ring. The response came quickly, and to his surprise, the details were spot on. They agreed to meet at a park near his apartment. As he waited on a bench, the ring tucked safely in his pocket, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A man approached him, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed out of place in the quiet neighborhood. He introduced himself and described the ring again, his tone calm but insistent. The man extended his hand, but before the ring could change hands, a voice called out, "Wait, wait." A woman hurried toward them, her face pale and her eyes wide. "That's my ring!" The suited man turned, his expression hardening. "I don't think so," he said smoothly. "It belongs to me." The tension crackled in the air as the two strangers faced off, each claiming ownership of the ring. The man who found it stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The woman's voice trembled as she explained that the ring had been passed down in her family for generations, while the suited man countered with a convincing story about a recent engagement. Caught in the middle, he didn't know who to believe. Both stories sounded plausible, but something about the suited man's demeanor felt rehearsed, calculated. He decided to stall, suggesting they all meet at the police station to sort it out. The suited man hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. As they walked to the station, the woman whispered to him, her voice urgent. "That man isn't who he says he is. I've seen him before. He's a con artist." The man's stomach dropped. Was she telling the truth, or was this another layer of deception? He glanced at the suited man, who seemed calm, even smug, as if he already knew how this would end. At the station, the officers listened to both sides, examining the ring and asking questions. The tension in the room was palpable, each word adding to the growing uncertainty. The man who found the ring felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. If he gave it to the wrong person, he'd never forgive himself. Just as the officers were about to make a decision, another twist unfolded. A third person entered the station, a frail, elderly man clutching a photograph. His voice was shaky but firm as he spoke. "That ring belongs to my late wife. I have proof." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the photograph in the man's hand. It showed a younger version of him, smiling beside a woman who wore the very same ring. But the story was far from over. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, it became clear that this wasn't just about a lost ring. It was about greed, deception, and the lengths people would go to for something they believed was theirs. The man who found the ring stood at the center of it all, caught in a web of conflicting truths. His simple act of honesty had spiraled into something far more complicated, and the hardest part was yet to come. Who could he trust? And what would he do when the final truth came to light? The answer, it seemed, would change everything. The room was heavy with silence as the elderly man's trembling hands held out the photograph. The image of the ring, shining on his late wife's finger, was unmistakable. Everyone stared at it, their expressions shifting. The woman's defiance softened into uncertainty, the suited man's smugness faltered, and the man who had found the ring felt a wave of relief. Finally, there was something tangible, something real. The officer took the photograph and studied it closely, then turned to the elderly man. "Can you tell us more about this ring and how it came to be lost?" The man nodded, his voice breaking as he began to speak. "It belonged to my wife, Margaret. We were married for 50 years. She wore it every day until the day she passed. After she was gone, I kept it in a small box by her photograph on the mantel. It was all I had left of her. But one day, I came home to find the box gone. I didn't know who could have taken it or how it ended up here." His words hung in the air, raw with emotion. The man who found the ring felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of a lifetime of love and memories. The suited man cleared his throat, his smooth confidence returning. "That's a touching story, but it doesn't prove the ring is his. Anyone could claim something like that." The officer raised an eyebrow. "And what proof do you have that it belongs to you?" The suited man hesitated for a moment before launching into his well-rehearsed story about a recent engagement and how the ring had been custom-made. But as he spoke, cracks began to show. The details didn't quite line up, and his polished facade started to crumble under the weight of the officer's questions. The woman, who had been silent since the elderly man's arrival, suddenly stepped forward. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I lied. The ring isn't mine. I thought if I could claim it, I could sell it and pay off some debts. But seeing him," she gestured to the elderly man, "I can't do this. It's his. It has to be." The confession sent a ripple through the room. The suited man's face darkened, his charm replaced by frustration. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You can't just take his word for it. How do we know he's not lying?" The officer's gaze was steady. "We'll investigate further, but your behavior isn't helping your case." The suited man's protest grew louder, but they were cut short when another officer entered the room, holding a small envelope. "We ran the ring through our database," she said. "Turns out it matches the description of a theft report filed a few years ago by Mr. Thompson here." She nodded toward the elderly man. The room fell silent again, but this time the tension broke. The man who had found the ring let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was over. The ring's rightful owner had been found. The suited man was escorted out, grumbling under his breath, and the woman quietly left, her shoulders slumped with regret. The elderly man turned to the man who had found the ring, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You've given me back a piece of my wife, a piece of my life." The man smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm just glad it's back where it belongs." In the days that followed, the story spread. Local news outlets picked it up, calling it a tale of honesty and hope in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. The man who had found the ring became something of a local hero, though he shied away from the attention. For him, the reward was in knowing he had done the right thing. But life had more surprises in store. One afternoon, he received a letter in the mail. It was from the elderly man, thanking him once again and inviting him over for tea. Curious, he accepted. When he arrived at the elderly man's modest home, he was greeted with warmth and a sense of familiarity. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives. The elderly man learned about the struggles the younger man faced, his determination to keep going despite everything. As they sat together, the elderly man excused himself and returned with a small box. "I want you to have this," he said, handing it over. Inside was a simple gold band, worn but beautiful. "It's not worth much," the man said, "but it belonged to my father. He always said it brought him luck. I think you deserve a little luck yourself." The younger man was speechless. He tried to refuse, but the elderly man insisted. "You've already done more for me than I can ever repay. Let this be my way of saying thank you." From that day on, their lives were intertwined. The elderly man became a mentor, a friend, and a reminder that kindness could bridge even the widest gaps. The younger man found new opportunities, doors opening in ways he never expected. The diamond ring had been the catalyst, but the true treasure was the connection they had formed, a bond that reminded them both of the power of doing what's right, even when it's hard. As time passed, the man often reflected on the journey that began with a sparkle on the sidewalk. He realized that the choices we make, no matter how small, can ripple out in ways we can't predict. And sometimes the greatest rewards aren't material, they're the relationships and lessons we gain along the way. The story of the diamond ring became a reminder for everyone who heard it. Integrity, compassion, and courage can change lives. And sometimes, when you least expect it, doing the right thing can bring you more than you ever bargained for.